Coal's complicated. Lots of people depend on it, not only for energy, but also for their family's income. But before we get into the future of energy and the debate on quitting coal, we must first briefly establish the history of coal and how we became so intertwined with its fate.
And today, in our boasted modern civilization, we are facing just exactly the same problem, just exactly the same conflict between two schools of philosophy that they faced in the earliest days of America.
In northeastern China, within the Fusen mine, coal is found. It's roughly 1000 BC, and an energy revolution that will produce what Marco Polo called, quote, black stones which burn like logs, is just beginning, along with all the resources that would accompany and change the face of humanity. This was the world's first ever coal mine. The technology would allow the Chinese to not only smelt iron with it, but also begin to heat their homes. For iron smelting, just in the Henan-Hebei border iron area, alone in the 11th century, sources present a substantial usage, up around 140,000 tons a year. But see, that's just coal's beginning. It's just a baby. It's a brand new technology. And at every possible point, still innovations are being made to produce not only quicker, but in higher qualities as well. But in the long centuries that have passed, we've gotten pretty good at burning coal. In fact, humans have burned easily over 500 billion tons of it. According to The Guardian, that's about 65,729.6 Great Pyramids. I'll admit, it's a strange measuring tool, but still, it's quite effective. You can see how massive this usage is. All of this is to prove a point, or maybe ask a few questions, I'm not sure. Why is our energy producing method so stagnant? What has happened that trapped coal within the ecosystem of energy within nearly every developed nation on the globe? What are the current and future effects of such an overwhelming dependency? And lastly, why and how do we move forward away from coal? Through the 19th and 20th century, coal remained as a vital resource for Western nations' domestic energy. Coal is so embedded into the modern diplomatic map that the European Union, supposedly the keeper of democratic peace throughout the globe, was founded out of the European coal and steel community, responsible for the heating of thousands of homes both along the seacoast and inland. In Europe, by the way. Just in Europe. In modern times, even within wealthy countries such as the UK and the US, the emission industry for coal is around 1,000 grams of CO2 for every kilowatt hour of energy produced. Emission intensity is one of the primary ways we measure emissions. Significantly, greenhouse gases emitted over the life of a generation is defined by emission intensity. And the before-mentioned figure of 1,000 grams of CO2 for every kilowatt hour of energy only applies to the most efficient of coal plants. And with more modest plants, energy output often surpasses 1,200 grams of CO2 every kilowatt hour. Now, it's easy to get lost in all these numbers, but just to put you into some perspective, not saying this is a solution, but when we burn natural gas, it only emits about 500 grams of CO2 for every kilowatt hour. That's a big difference. Now, natural gas is dangerous in its own way, and I'll definitely make a video on its destructive tendencies later. It's not to be underestimated. Unfortunately, the troubles don't end with the environment. It is a peer-reviewed scientific fact that the use of coal causes health effects and a lowered average lifespan. The Great Smog of London, also known as the Killer Fog or simply the Great Smog in 1952, was a personification of these human effects. On a chilly morning, the 4th of December 1952, an anticyclone descended over an unknowing London. Within hours, a temperature inversion took effect over the city, essentially trapping a lid, a warm air layer, and trapping a cold, settled atmosphere over the population. The fog was so thick that for 4 days, almost all above ground transportation was impossible, and underground tunnels became festering caverns of pollution toxic to most who encountered it. Over 6,000 people perished in the tragedy, giving a stark reminder to the toxins spreading into our atmosphere on a daily basis. But beyond historical events and simple CO2 emission measurements, there are more tangible effects that coal uniquely places around its surrounding ecosystems. Firstly, our underground coal fires, of which thousands are burning throughout the world. These fires' fumes are almost uniformly fatal to the diverse above-ground flora and fauna. They can cause the ground to subside and can ignite large, uncontrollable wildfires. And while the underground smolderings have likely been responsible for the rebirth of life and creation of renewed ecosystems in the past, that would still mean the destruction of all life that currently exists in those ecosystems. It's not great. Secondly, water systems can be devastated by coal plants. One such side effect of watershed contamination is acid rain. Acid rain is caused when sulfur dioxide is released, oxidizing and turning into this. I'm not a chemistry major, I'm sorry. I guess that's actually not that long, but again, I'm not STEM for a reason. My point being, that shouldn't be there. It's bad. Anyways, this sulfur eventually precipitates, causing what we call acid rain, and providing one of the few tangible, scary effects to show non-climate change believers. So, with the public easy to obtain knowledge of all these scary, very real things, why do we still use coal and invest in it? In 2015 alone, over $2.5 trillion US dollars, or roughly 3% of the world's GDP, was used as subsidies for coal. This is global and being broadly applied, but still, it's evidence. And it's further to the truth. The modern, quote, free market is allowing politics and economics to sustain coal long past its due date. And globally, we should be making a push forward towards fusion and clean renewables, along with many others, but certainly not backwards towards pollutants. Yes, money will need to be involved, maybe even a lot of it. But so is $2.5 trillion to continue the resurrection of long-dead industries. The Paris Climate Agreement attempts to take the first step towards our energy crisis, although China, India, and Japan have all faced criticism for attempting to block certain aims of the agreement. This, of course, is alongside the attacks Donald Trump has engaged in constantly throughout his presidency. Some countries, such as those involved in the Power Past Coal Alliance, have already pronounced to move past the fuel. In other countries, such as the United States, things are admittedly much more difficult. Job replacement is at the top of priorities, but luckily there are multitudes of ways to fix the issue. The easiest would be to build either production or management of clean energy into the same job markets that will be affected by those coal plant closures. This means coal plant workers would be given higher paying jobs in the new market, allowing for communities to not be destroyed. In conclusion, however we transition, we must do it soon. Not only for the health of our planet, but for the health of all the people living on it. Coal is dangerous, outdated, and inefficient. We can do better. We just have to be willing to work together. And for the future of us all, we better get educated and find solutions.